Hello and welcome back to Predict It Live, only on Old Bull TV, your exclusive source for real-time coverage of the stock market for politics. Today, we've got your first look at a market that just hit the site on a big upcoming vote in the Senate. This one is going to be where all the action is early next week, and we're about to get a jump on it. So let's get to it. I am your host, Flip Pideaux, and if you have not yet cashed in on that free $25 to get started trading, take this quick opportunity to go to predictit.org/promo/oldbull25 and collect the only free lunch available on the site. And if you're watching live, please do ask your questions in the chat window. Get to as many of those as possible. And if you're not watching live, feel free to send any follow-up feedback, questions, or complaints, requests for future market coverage via Twitter, where our DMs are open, and our handle is OldBullTV. Please also take just a quick second to subscribe to the channel while you're here. And normally, as you would do that, I would introduce the panel. But since we have no panel today, it's just me. So let's get straight away to the new stuff. And as I mentioned, there are actually a few new markets on the site today. They all have to do with Senate votes. But the one that we're going to take a look at is the yay votes, votes in favor on passage of the China bill, aka the Endless Frontier Act, the U.S. Innovation and Competition Act, or USICA, or otherwise affectionately known as simply the China bill. In short, what this bill does is it gives the National Science Foundation, an agency with an $8.5 billion budget, some $120 billion to play with, ostensibly to blunt the competitive impact of a rising China. Now, just to get our arms around the rules and contours of this market, this will resolve based on the outcome of any vote on passage of a bill that would establish a directorate for technology and innovation within the NSF. And all versions of this bill do that. That's sort of the core of the bill. So you may have seen a number of amendments flying around, which we'll talk about a little bit, but there shouldn't be any rules slippage tied to any tweaks to this bill, given that it's sort of the central legislative impact that settlement is tied to. It's tied to the first such vote on passage by June 25th. This is scheduled for next week, so we shouldn't have any problem on the date. Unless it gets completely scrapped, we should have a vote by 6/25. If no vote were to occur, the bottom bracket, B, min, 65 or fewer, would resolve as yes. And if this were to pass by voice vote or division vote, any other method that doesn't result in a tally or roll call, then B max or 90 plus would resolve as yes. So recall that this is the bill, the vote that an amendment to which held up everything in the Senate last week, as the Senate was getting ready to go home for the Memorial Day weekend. And of course, as we predicted, traders were all glued to the C-SPAN feed, trying to figure out what they were going to do on the January 6th commission vote, and if they were going to have time to get to it. Of course, Rand Paul and a few other senators that opposed this bill, the China bill, which was earlier in the legislative calendar than the January 6th commission, threatened to use up all 30 hours, and then upon another cloture vote, another 30 hours of debate to stretch this into Saturday and even Sunday of Memorial Day weekend. And of course, this ultimately resulted in a deal being made that punted vote on passage on this bill, the China bill, until June 8th, which is to say next Tuesday. If I have that right, that's next Tuesday. Yes. No specific time, but next Tuesday is when they're supposed to vote on passage of this, and in exchange for them going ahead with the January 6th commission vote last week, which we'd be remiss not to remind you that we got that market wrong in the timing. We didn't think they would actually get to it by May 28th, which is the date that market expired. But even as we steered you astray on that one in terms of the bracket that would resolve this, yes, we did actually manage to nail the whip count on Republican votes, which is to say defections, Republicans voting in favor. We had said there would be 5 yeses and 2 maybes, suggesting about 6, which turned out to be exactly how many Republicans did vote for it, whereas consensus had been 3 to 4. So we actually did, I think, a pretty good job of sort of analyzing where the pack would shake out when they actually got to a vote. We just had tragically the wrong timing on when the vote would occur. So where do we start in trying to count the votes in favor on passage of this China bill on Tuesday? Well, the first and best, sort of initial proxy to look at would be the cloture vote that they did have on this amendment just before getting out of town last week. And for all the hand wringing and posters and examples of egregious government waste that were thrown around in sort of pseudo filibustering this. This was after the first cloture vote, but they were just running out the clock on the remaining 30 hours of debate. For all that hand wringing and horse trading, it wound up with a large supermajority voting in favor of cloture, some 68 votes with 2 non-votes. So it was actually 68-30, very lopsided vote considering how contentious it had been. So if we look at that again as sort of an initial input into our whip counting, if we can go over to the sort of tentative whip count that we put up on Twitter earlier. Yep, here it is. Yeah, so you can see at the top, we start from the party line vote of 50-50. This is a largely partisan bill. I mean, it does have a support from a number of Republicans, but as a sort of a baseline, you can assume virtually all of the Democrats are going to support. A majority of Republicans are going to oppose. So start from that 50-50 just based on party composition of the Senate. And then these ones, all the yeses down here with the R's next to their names, these are the Republicans that voted yes on cloture. And with the exception of, we've listed here a few with the third column over, the ones over in that right column. These are the ones that we've labeled as maybes. But as you go down here, you get to that 21 figure. That's our best guess at the outset here of number of Republicans that would cross over for the on passage vote. It was 19 of them that voted in favor of cloture. And of course, you had Bernie Sanders here, the one Democrat caucusing senator who voted against the bill. He didn't like the idea that billions of dollars are going to Jeff Bezos for his spaceship and to big semiconductor companies. So it was sort of an anti-corporate welfare protest vote that led Sanders to oppose. We assume he will continue to oppose for that reason, that he didn't get his various amendments into the bill. So you got a net 18 on cloture. Here we're assuming a net 20 votes, so 70 in favor, 25 against, with 5 maybe. So that 70 maybe has a little bit of room to tick a little bit higher. So if you go back to the brackets on this market and see kind of where they are tuned here, where PredictIt set them. So you got the lowest bracket, 65 or fewer, the highest bracket, 90 or more. At first glance, it seems like these brackets might be a little bit high. Might have set them at something more like 60 to 85, or you can go 2 wide rather than 3 wide, make it 65 to 82, something like that. Another wrinkle here that could prevent the actual yay vote total from ticking higher is that the day before the cloture vote, the Club for Growth, very influential think tank and lobbying group, officially opposed this legislation. And this may have spooked a few would-be yes votes into voting no, or at least not voting. I would note that among the so-called defenders of freedom, these are sort of the highest ranked Club for Growth, highest ranked senators in the Club for Growth scorecard. Among the 6 that qualify for that highest tier are included Senators Blackburn and Cruz. Now, interestingly, in our whip count, Cruz we've got as a maybe, I believe, where we set him. He may be more appropriately classified as a no, despite the fact that he voted yes in committee, which is why we had him as a maybe, even though he did not vote for closure on this. The fact that he voted yes in committee, we thought he might be a maybe. But the fact that, again, he is one of sort of the most aligned with the Club for Growth, and they have just identified this as a scored vote, one they're strongly urging senators to vote against, that may keep him in the no column. The other one, as I mentioned, Marsha Blackburn, she was one of the 2 who did not vote at all in this cloture vote. It was Blackburn and Senator Blunt were both absent. Senator Blunt is actually a sponsor of this legislation, or co-sponsor, so we would expect he would support so long as he's not absent from the chamber during the vote. And Senator Blackburn actually helped lead a group of Republicans in getting a major amendment into this bill. So we would presume that she would ordinarily be a yes vote. It may be more appropriate to move her to a maybe, given that she's also in this top tier of Club for Growth senators. And again, Cruz, arguably, you could move from maybe to no. So, revisiting the bottom tally at the bottom of this tentative whip count, rather than 70, 25, 5, if you were to shift Cruz from maybe to no and Blackburn from yes to maybe and Cruz from maybe to no, you go from 70, 25, 5. to 69.26.5. So we'll split the difference, call it 69.5. Call all those maybes worth half. So the 5 becomes 2.5. Add that 69.5, you get to 72. So that's a sort of a very tentative read on kind of where the meaty part of the distribution on this forecast might be. So that would put you basically in bracket 4 before the 72 to 74, arguably, possibly a little bit below that if these maybes skew heavily towards no, if the consensus building has become, no, this is a little too porky, this is a $120 billion slush fund, then maybe that could tick a little bit lower. But again, generally speaking, just based on where these brackets are set from 65 to 90, with the median being 77, 78, that seems to me, at least from what we've seen so far, again, based on this cloture vote as a proxy, based on Club for Growth coming out sort of in full-throated opposition, based on the fact that seemed to spook Cruz and possibly Blackburn, means you could peel off some of these folks who either voted yes in committee or didn't vote, perhaps not those that actually sponsored it, unless the remainder of the amendment process winds up really bulking this up into something they no longer can get behind. Of course, we've seen all this horse trading and maneuvering in the Senate, so you never know how a different vehicle for legislation is going to get moved, get incorporated in something else, get delayed. It's not beyond the realm of possibility this does get punted to after the end of June. That being said, this is one Schumer has really been focused on. He wants to get it through. I think he wants to get it through with bipartisan support. I think he's ticked off about the fact that they were able to force him to punt it back from last week to next week. So I wouldn't expect that there would be too much here to rock the boat to dramatically change this dynamic. But this is not to say it's sufficiently ripened, gotten close enough to the vote where you can really zoom in on a single bracket. Again, just trying at this point to identify where we should think about that median forecast and at least start to identify what is the list of senators here who may be swayable, what's their kind of demonstrated default position, which ones might be swayable and why, and sort of build out that list of ones you want to really be paying attention to for public statements. Obviously, going into that January 6th commission vote, the several, we identified as many as maybe 13, but really it was a half dozen or more in the end who were really swayable. The media was hounding them constantly for updated statements of intent and their position on the bill. There's not quite as much focus on this one, so you're not going to be able to maintain as good a real-time read on the shifting intentions of these senators in question. But again, you want to at least have that list in mind, and to kind of tier that. Again, I would say it's Cruz and Blackburn at the top of the list. If they've been spooked by Club for Growth saying you got to vote against this, then again you get from maybe 70 or 71 down to 69, possibly 70. Before you allocate the rest of those maybes. Then the rest on the list that I'd be most interested in keeping tabs on would be Sullivan, Thune, Moran, and Fisher. Again, these are the ones that voted yes in committee, but no on cloture. So again, the cloture was a procedural vote. It was to some extent tactical, and as they were getting ready to dealing with a bunch of stuff at the end of last week and getting ready to go on the holiday weekend. But these would be the next 4 that I'd really want to find out about because they comprise the majority of that maybe bucket. And again, even with 3 wide brackets, which are a little wider than last time we had just 2 wide brackets, those 3 or 4 senators could easily move you from one to another bracket. Bernie Sanders, obviously, should he be moved to come around on this, would be another one to keep an eye on. And of course, any Republicans not flagged in this list who just simply voted no, and we don't have any indication they would vote yes because they didn't sponsor, they didn't vote for it in committee. But should any of them suddenly say, hey, you know what, I've come around, or there's a national laboratory in my state that this throws 10 million bucks at, so I want to make them happy. Something like that could obviously happen. You don't want to forego keeping an eye on really all 100 members at the end of the day. But again, I think Cruz and Blackburn are your top priority. Sullivan, Thune, Moran, and Fisher, and then Sanders. If you've got a close eye on those 7, you can sort of use this as a baseline to go from. But again, I think let's call it 69 or 70 plus 2 or 3 of these maybes gets you to about 72. If this is too early for you actually to start building positions in these brackets, then at least hopefully that gives you a sense of what the contours ought to look like if you buy into this reasoning of kind of where that distribution should fall. And again, the sweet spot seems to me at least to be somewhere around B4. Could even make an argument for B3. as I mentioned at the top, it is just me today. So we don't have any other panel picks that we're going to look at. I do want to go. I don't actually have it in front of me. I closed the window, but let me open up the chat window, see if any of y'all have questions. You don't at this point, but I'll continue just to jabber for a minute or two. If you had a question, you didn't get a chance to submit it yet, go ahead and do that now. Try to answer that in real time. And if you don't, or don't get a chance to, or if you're only catching this on the replay, again, please feel free to reach out to us on Twitter, where DMs are open at Old Bull TV. But if no one has questions here in real time, do keep an eye on this market. Again, it's just launched, so it's very thin now. Virtually no trading as those bid-ask spreads start to narrow, as the order book starts to fill up. But again, if you develop an actionable thesis here, you want to trade on, this is sometimes when it's illiquid, when you can get some sort of advantageous entry points. But it can also be if you just try and buy or sell at the market, where you can really get killed. So figure out what your strategy is here, whether you agree with or disagree with sort of my thinking on what the best sort of medium forecast ought to be here, and try and get in opportunistically. But as illiquid and wide as the bid-ask spreads are now, by the time we get to Tuesday, I really think this one is going to be maybe not quite as active as that January 6th commission, because that was obviously quite a radioactive political football, to mix a couple of Washington metaphors. But I think this will become very much in focus. Any of these ones that have a number of brackets here, 10 brackets of numerical outcomes, they're tied to a Senate whip count. That at this point, there's a lot of uncertainty around, and yet we'll start to collapse those uncertainties as we get closer, one by one, as different senators get pinned down. And I think there is at least sufficient media attention on this that, if as long as you go looking for it, you will start to find some of those statements that this will become, really volatile and high volume and exciting, action-packed kind of market on Monday, in particular Tuesday of next week. So keep an eye on the Senate calendars and statements from Schumer in terms of exactly when they're going to hold this vote, any postponement that could wind up happening, any last-minute amendments. I think there are a couple more procedural votes they have to take, but per the deal that they struck at the end of last week to get Rand Paul to stop threatening to keep them in the chamber all weekend, I think there are no more cloture votes. In other words, there's a bit of remaining debate time from the last cloture vote, but I think the additional cloture vote they were expecting, they're not going to have. So as far as I can tell, they're not going to have another 30 hours of debate. There are a couple more procedural votes on amendments, and then I think the final vote on passage with that 60 vote threshold. But again, effectively, we're now through both the formal filibuster and the post filibuster debate clock. So it should, I would think, it's dangerous to suggest this, but it should, all things considered, go relatively smoothly for the rest of the procedure in the Senate on Tuesday. So you want to make sure that you are well positioned to take advantage of that action if it doesn't indeed wind up being as interesting a day in this market, day or 2 days, Monday, Tuesday, as we would expect. I do see a question just popped up here. So this is from FW. It says, how does PredictIt start markets? Not sure exactly what you're referring to, but if you mean how do they decide what markets to launch, or kind of how does the pricing start when they launch? The latter is a question that a lot of people ask. How does PredictIt decide what price to set a various question at? And as you may or may not know, seasoned traders will be familiar with how the order book works. When they launch a market, there effectively is no pricing. It's up to you, then the trader or your fellow traders, go and say, well, I'll bid 20 on this, or I'll bid, I'll take the short side at 80. I want to sell it for 80. So in other words, buy at 20 cents. That is not going to happen. And as that 20-80 spread starts to get narrower and narrower, eventually you get a trade match, and that's the opening price. And then the price shifts as that order book and expectations driving it shift. In terms of how do they decide what markets to launch, that's a much longer conversation to process. I was used to be involved in it, PredictIt for their first 5 years. So it's a combination of the input of the internal question generation team, and so their combined insight and research of what's going on in the political landscape, but also sort of what traders are interested in trading. Of course, what makes a good market is a combination of having sufficient political significance, sufficient interest among the would-be traders of those events, and also being something that can be collapsed down to some binary, unambiguous, discrete political yes or no outcome. And of course, that's really where the rubber meets the road, and doing that is a lot harder than than it might appear on things that would, at least at first glance, appear to be relatively cut and dry propositions. So, but like I said, it's a much longer and larger conversation in terms of how do they decide what markets to start, and a lot of different inputs and points of view that go into the process. But thank you for the question. Hopefully that's at least somewhat helpful to you. Please, if I didn't answer it, or if you have any other questions, again, follow up on Twitter, Old Bull TV. DMs are open. I want to thank you all for joining us. We'll be back again 1 p.m. tomorrow. We're going to have Gaten Dugas and Yabvek here to talk about New Mexico and some of the other post-op debrief autopsy of the New Mexico one market, the infamous New Mexico one from earlier this week, and to look at the new markets coming tomorrow, Friday. Gosh, is it Friday already? It is Friday, June 4th. Join us then, 1 p.m. New traders, don't forget to claim that free $25 at predictit.org/promo/oldbull25. Follow us on Twitter. Join the conversation. Thank you for watching. Happy trading, and we'll see you next time.